Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Shall we get going?
Yes, sir.
I doubt if anyone will come. Even if they come, I doubt if they'll stay. Okay. Um, so yesterday I was basically talking to you about uh, uh, Buddhism as something that came up against uh, Brahmanism. Okay. A lot of people say that it came up against Hinduism. And I was telling you that the word Hindu doesn't figure in that time period. That came with the Muslims. It came around the 7th century, the word, and it didn't come as Hindu, it came as Hind. Okay, and it was Raja Ram Mohan Roy who used it as Hinduism. Okay, and I told you there is no Hinduism because these are all different fragmented documents that contradict each other, and therefore to try and say that this is one solid mass of thinking which is consistent at all levels, it is impossible. So the Buddha was not somebody who was against the idea of Sanatana Dharma. In fact, if you look at most of his teachings, he did believe in Dharma. Okay. His disagreement, like I said yesterday, was with the Brahmins. And he first and foremost thought that the Brahmins were those who were distorting Sanatana Dharma. And the second thing that he talked about was that by using Sanskrit as the language, the Brahmins were uh, actually trying to ensure that other people did not get to uh, understand the, because again at that time there were no written documents. They didn't get to understand the oral traditions of passing on knowledge. Okay, so by having a vice-like grip on the Sanskrit language, they denied knowledge to other people. So Buddha therefore took recourse to Pali, and in certain instances, he also is supposed to have taken recourse to Prakrit, but there isn't much evidence of his using Prakrit. But definitely there is a lot of evidence of his using Pali. And he believed that knowledge is something that should go to everyone. Okay. Now, the Buddha was born as Siddhartha Gautama. There are two spellings used. One is Siddhartha is anyway Siddhartha. some people write it as Gautama, Gautama, and other people write it as Gotama, Gautama. Okay, that is because in English, AU is also pronounced as O. Our pronunciation, for instance, if we talk about the term HOLOCAUST, this word, we pronounce it as Holocaust, right? HOLOCAUST. We pronounce it as Holocaust, but actual pronunciation of this is Holocaust. So you find a lot of people also write Om not as OM Om, but AUM Om. OM becomes OM, they say. So this is a bit of syntax and matters of phonetics. So the more widely accepted spelling is Siddhartha Gautama, Gautama. Okay, and he was also therefore called Gautama Buddha. Siddhartha was rarely used uh, after he shunned the world. Okay, he was, as you know, born in Nepal. He was born in the Lumbini, in a place called Lumbini, which was in Kapilavastu. Okay, and his birth was supposed to be a miracle, but let's not get into that. Um, his parents were Suddhodana and Maya. Okay, those were his parents, and they belong to this particular, people say dynasty, some people say clan. Uh, it is certainly not clan, because a clan is a very small number of people led by a leader. So it is certainly not a clan that Suddhodana was leading. He was definitely leading a kingdom. So it is therefore not incorrect to say that it was it was some kind of a dynasty itself. Okay, and the dynasty was called the Shakya. Okay, it's written with S and top this thing there, because it is not Sakya, it is not Shakya, it is Shakya. Okay, so Shakya, he belonged to this particular dynasty, and since he became a mendicant, he earned the title of Muni. And since he came from the Shakya dynasty, he became Shakya Muni. Quite a few people used to refer to him as Shakya Muni in his own time. In later times, nobody refers to him as Shakya Muni. And in fact, some Buddhist scholars argue that it was only for a very brief duration, that after he renounced his family, he renounced the world, that he was called Shakya Muni. Uh, but otherwise, he was simply called Gautama. Okay. Well, these are all things open to various different kinds of interpretations, and therefore, and we can't possibly decide which is the most appropriate interpretation. Any of these interpretations is probably acceptable. Uh, One thing is for sure, that he did have a very shielded life. He was very sheltered. He was not somebody who was made to or allowed to see the world as it was. So you must have read that story about how one day he saw a bent old uh, lady walking with a stick, and a person who had died being carried away. And after having seen these and people begging for food, after seeing all these things, he was completely shaken, because otherwise he was supposed to be just confined to his palace where he lived, and he didn't see the world for what it was. But other scholars will argue against this particular position. That he, he it was in his later life that he came to see all these things. Uh, because today the world says that all of us are aware of mortality by birth. We are aware of old age by birth. Okay, so even a small child can understand what is death. Okay, a small child who is 3 or 4 years old can understand death. And I personally have seen 3 or 4 instances like that. Okay, my second foster son was 3 years old when his mother died, and he didn't say what is death. He was just told your mother has died, and he accepted it. Okay, so people, it's programmed into us. Okay, our minds are already programmed to know all these things, to see old age, to see death, all that. Now, but uh, what can be accepted as a correct argument is the fact that since he was sheltered, he didn't understand poverty. He didn't understand the travails and difficulties that came with poverty, that came with old age. We are programmed to understand old age, but we are not programmed to understand what exactly happens to old people, how they suffer. But by the time he came to understand these things, he had already been married to Yashodhara, and he, after seeing the world for what it was and what it represented, he was somebody who was transformed as a person. He became a very, very brooding individual. Okay, brooding or constantly thinking about something. And at that time, he had a child. And when the news was given to him that he had a child, he decided to call him Rahula. Okay, he said, this is Rahula. The meaning of Rahula is that it is an impediment, or it is something which is in, if you want to take a Sanskrit equivalent of that, it is a vigna or an impediment that stands in the way of you becoming, uh, it stands in the way of you becoming something, right? So he wasn't happy. He left his palace. He left his wife, his child, his everybody, and decided to become a mendicant, because he thought it is only by becoming a mendicant that he would be able to understand the whole notion of why people actually lead lives which are full of pain and sorrow. Okay. In all the years of brooding that he did, even before he became a mendicant, before he left the palace, I told you he was brooding, he was constantly thinking, and he reached the conclusion that samsara, okay, SAMSARA, samsara, or the world as we know it, that's samsara, its primary characteristic, the primary characteristic of samsara for anyone is dukkha. Okay, Dukkha is one spelling that you can use for dukkha. The other spelling that you can use is Dukkha, dukkha, because there's a strong emphasis on the kha. So dukkha. So he believed that one should understand what causes dukkha, right? And he also believed that everybody's life in some way or the other was controlled by dukkha. Now, if you read English translations, this word dukkha is translated as suffering. Okay, most English writings will tell you that dukkha is suffering. That is not the accurate translation of dukkha. The more correct translation of dukkha is sorrow and sadness. Okay, sorrow and sadness. So what uh, uh, the Buddha believed was that the primary thing that affects all of us is dukkha, which is sorrow and sadness, and this causes pain and suffering. Okay, when we talk about pain, please remember pain need not necessarily be physical. Pain can also be something which you feel in your mind. You'll say, I'm pained by what I saw, right? In fact, even if you go by modern medicine, I told you the other day, I think, that you don't feel pain in your body. Okay. Uh, if you look at the idea that I have a pain in my leg, right? You are not feeling the pain in your leg, though you think you're feeling the pain in your leg. You're feeling it in your brain, in your mind. Your mind is telling you that you have a pain because that is the way it alerts you to the idea that there is something wrong with your leg, and that is why you're getting this pain. Okay, that's nothing but the brain giving you control over your, brain telling you that there is something wrong. Medical research now says that human beings are the ones who experience most pain and suffering because of uh, the fact that the human brain has the biggest among all living creatures. It has the biggest emotional center. Okay, it has the most emotional, biggest emotional center. Other things are motor functions. Okay, this is a motor function, this is a motor function. These are not really the ones that define the human being. What defines the human being is the emotional center. And if you remember, I had, when we were last semester, when we were doing Aristotle, Aristotle also believed in this particular idea of catharsis, catharsis, catharsis. What was catharsis? According to Aristotle, catharsis was getting rid of your pain, sorrow. Okay, and a lot of people will tell you, if you're very sorrowful, you're very sad, after you cry, you feel better. Okay, people, when say somebody passes away or whatever, when we experience some loss, we cry. Crying or weeping is one way of getting rid of that sorrow that is built in us. Okay, and the Buddha basically says what drives human life is this dukkha, which is sorrow or sadness. And this dukkha manifests itself as suffering. Okay, it is because you're not suffering just for suffering. You're suffering because you're sad. You're suffering because you're experiencing sorrow. Okay, so therefore, dukkha is not sorrow. Dukkha, is not suffering. I'm sorry. Dukkha is sadness, sorrow, which culminates in suffering. All right. Now I'll get back to this point a little later. Now, you will see that most of the teachings of the Buddha are those which were oral. He followed the oral tradition, as was the case in India, because uh, nobody wrote things down. It was communities uh, that were built around oral communication. Okay, writing is a very Western thing. It's a Western civilization thing. If you look at the Indian civilization, most of the things have been documented in memory, and they have been passed through conversations. Knowledge sharing happened through conversations. Okay, and even Western philosopher like Jacques Derrida, okay, who's a critic of modernism, he claims writing is nothing but a subtype of speech. Speech is talking, right? And he says writing is not independent of this. It is a subtype. The main thing is the speech. Writing is a subtype of this thing called speech. That is what Derrida says in the 20th century, right? So the Westerners also veered around to the view that the primary form of communication was oral only. And oral form of communication is the best form of communication, because if somebody doesn't understand you properly, he can ask you, what does that mean? Or if you see that somebody has not understood you appropriately, then you will possibly tell that person, you have not understood me correctly. Okay, so this whole process of understanding each other through conversation, again in Western philosophy, if we use the example of Habermas, Habermas says conversations can be dialogical, okay, not dialogue, okay, dialogical, dialogical, dialogical. Why are they dialogical? Because both parties involved in a conversation can understand the logic. Both the parties who are involved in a conversation can understand the logic of the conversation as it is meant to be understood. So he believed that oral conversations are dialogical and they are better than written ones. Because once I have written something and given to you and I have disappeared from there, that work is no longer mine. Okay, please remember that about anything which is written. If somebody has written a book, that ceases to be his the moment it goes to the reader. It is the reader who decides what is there in the book. Okay, so there's no dialogical conversation there, right? So Habermas therefore says that it is oral conversations which are better. And in that sense, the Indians perhaps were not backward, though a lot of people in India itself will tell you things like, you know, we didn't write, we only spoke, oral traditions are not reliable. Written traditions are equally unreliable or more unreliable than oral traditions. So therefore, please remember that he believed in the whole idea of he being the Buddha, believed in the idea of the oral traditions. Now the Buddha, after he left his palace, uh, he became a monk, M-O-N-K. Monk is somebody who has renounced the world, an ascetic, A-S-C-E-T-I-C, ascetic or monk is a sannyasin. So the Buddha had become a sannyasin, and he did not differ from the Sanatana Dharma sannyasins, because he also wore kashaya or saffron, okay, which was the color used by those who gave up the world. Okay, those people who have given up the world, renunciation, they used to wear saffron. All right, that is the significance of saffron. Somebody in saffron robes, somebody without hair. All these are indications of somebody who has said, I no longer want to enjoy the comforts of the world. And that is when he becomes a mendicant and a beggar. Okay, now the Buddha is known to have pulled out his hair. He didn't even go to a barber and get his head shaved. He pulled out his hair from his head. He wore saffron robes and became a sannyasin. And he believed very strongly in the concept of dhyana. Okay, he believed very, very strongly in the concept of dhyana. In Pali, dhyana is called jhanna. Okay, it is jhana, sorry, not jhanna, Jhana, jhana. Okay, whereas in Sanskrit, it is dhyana, Dhyana. So he believed in dhyana or jhana, and this meditation is slightly different from the other forms of meditation. Okay, if you take what the traditional Sanatana Dharma of ancient India said about dhyana, it was to overcome yourself. Okay, it was to overcome the particular self, which is you, and become one with the universal self, which is the Brahman or the Brahmanda. That was the concept of dhyana in Sanatana Dharma. In Buddha, that is not the concept of dhyana. It is not being tattvam asi. I am that, which is I am the Brahman. I am. That is not what Buddha is talking about. Buddha's meditation was, why do we feel sad? Why do we feel sorrow? And why do these things make us suffer? Why do we have to undergo this suffering which are brought on by sadness and sorrow? That is what he was basically uh, uh, meditating about. Now, let me also tell you one more thing here. There is a newfangled thing that is supposed to have come out of Buddhism, which people call, that is also called a dhyana system only. It's called vipassana, and it's tracked down to Buddhism, Vipasana, vipassana. Now, vipassana is a different thing. It is also a form of meditation, no doubt. It is something that asks you to concentrate on your breathing. Okay, it asks you to concentrate on your breathing, and by concentrating on your breathing, you are supposed to get some kind of mental peace. Okay, and uh, as a result of this, some Westerner invented a machine which was called a respiratory biofeedback machine. Okay, which is nothing but you are made to lie down in a dark room. If you're feeling agitated, you're made to lie down in a dark room. Your helmet like thing is strapped onto you, and when you breathe, you can hear your breath coming in from the speakers of that helmet like thing that you're wearing on your head. Okay, and when you hear yourself breathe, you fall asleep after some time. Okay, it calms you down, the agitation goes and it calms you down. That is Vipassana. Okay, but that is not the, it did come out of Buddhism. When and how is not documented. Somehow people do trace it back to Buddhism, but that is not the meditation that Buddha is talking about. His meditation was to try and understand why is it that we have sadness? Why do we suffer? That is his meditation. And for that, he's he wandered first. Okay, he wandered from Lumbini, which was in Nepal, Kapilavastu actually. He wandered from there, and he basically came to what is today called Bodh Gaya, okay, or Gaya, which is in Bihar. He came to Gaya, and he was in Gaya. He found the Bodhi tree. The Bodhi tree is a very large tree, and he sat under the Bodhi tree and meditated on the question of why do human beings suffer? Why do human beings feel sad? This is the question that he asked himself. So he was not meditating to become the universal self or the Brahman, but he was meditating in order to understand why people come to suffer or to feel sorrow. So it took him a very long time. He sat under the Bodhi tree. He tried to understand, and the understanding that he derived out of his meditation is Dukkha, which is the driving emotion of the people. Dukkha drives people, but what causes dukkha? That is the thing that you want to know. Okay, suffering is caused by dukkha, but what causes dukkha? Now, this is where the Buddha becomes spiritual, completely spiritual, and anti-materialistic. Materialistic is when you want to have comforts. Okay, you think my life will be very good if I have an air conditioner, if I have a comfortable bed to sleep in, if I have a vehicle on 2 wheels or 4 wheels to drive around. These are all what we think will give us happiness in life. Okay, they will provide us with comforts, they provide us with happiness. And in this pursuit of happiness, we try to acquire, that is the word. Okay, I want you to remember this word, acquire, ACQUIRE. We try to acquire more and more materialist things in order to lead a life of greater comfort and happiness. But the Buddha says this actually is illusory. Okay, it is illusory, or this is the his idea of Maya. Okay, this is his idea of Maya, where what actually causes you sorrow, what causes you suffering, you think that is going to bring you happiness. Okay, so that is the Maya. That is the illusory aspect. Now, take my case, for example. Okay, it's been, I don't know how many days since I gave my car for, you know, a checkup post the flooding that happened in my house. My car is not back. Nobody is telling me what is wrong with the car. I've stopped calling them. I've stopped calling the dealership. I've stopped calling the service station and asking them, when are you going to give my car? What is wrong with it? Okay, I gave it on the 16th of last month. Until date, I have no idea about what is happening to my car. Right? So now that is something that is dukkha hetu in Buddhism. Okay, because I bought a car thinking that it is something that will give me comfort. I can travel around peacefully in that. But here it is, this car dysfunctional, lying in a workshop, and I have no idea what is happening to it. And therefore, I experience a certain kind of unhappiness, sadness, all these kind of things I experience. Similarly, once you get used to an air conditioner, okay, this is how it is. Again, I'll tell you from my own experience. Once you get used to an air conditioner, if the air conditioner goes off even for 2 minutes in the summer when it is hot, then you'll say, oh my God, how am I going to get through it? There's no power, right? And you think the air conditioner is giving you comfort, but if the air conditioner conks out completely, and if the service station tells you that it will take 3 or 4 days to fix the air conditioner, then the thought of living in the heat without the air conditioner is something that makes me feel terrible. Okay, it makes me feel terrible. If I want to listen to music, I'll say I want the best stereo system that throws out the best quality sound. So I buy that. If that conks out, then I'll say, oh my God, this is conked out. Now I can't listen to music. So this acquisitiveness, acquiring more and more material things, okay, this acquisitiveness or acquiring more and more material things is that which is dukkha hetu. Okay, not accepting life for what it is, trying to make it something else, looking for luxuries, all these things are dukkha hetus in the system of thought that Buddha has. Apart from this, the Buddha will also try to tell you it is not just material things like air conditioners. I mean, of course, there were no air conditioners and all in his time, but even building relationships with people, becoming overly dependent upon people, overly dependent upon each other, okay, and thinking that I always need someone with me. All these things, these attachments that we form, okay, the attachments that we form, emotional attachments that we form are the ones that cause suffering. Okay, you should not have emotional attachments. That is what the Buddha says. Okay, if you have emotional attachments, say if you're some friend, you're very emotionally attached, that person dies, then what happens? You have sorrow. So, when you become a sannyasin, you should be detached. But in the Buddha, unlike in Sanatana Dharma, you will say this detachment is complete. You detach yourself, you isolate yourself. That is why people went to the Himalayas. Buddha didn't say that. Buddha said you can live in a sangha, you can live in society, have codependence, but without emotional attachment. I've come to it says less than a minute, so I'll stop here today. Tomorrow I'll pick this